What's up, guys? My name is Dean. I am founding GTM here at Sphinx. High level overview, just graduated college with a philosophy degree, but ended up in this whole tech world. And so diving pretty deep into GTM and all things marketing. So yeah, would love to chat more about that.
So obviously, going throughout even your education, this AI thing is becoming more consistent. I mean, I grew up and internet was commonplace. We would have everything compared to my parents' generation. Not saying we're that far in age difference, but when you're kind of viewing, kind of building marketing and this AI side of things, especially being so AI native, how do you approach it? How do you figure out where there should be a human in the loop? How do you still stay human? Because I feel it's so easy to say, well, we're going to use AI for that. How have you been differentiating as you go through your career now? Where is like AI being really useful for you, and where you're like, okay, there's still some human interactions, or at least to set it up properly.
Yeah. There's a couple of things here. I think the first thing to note is before implementing any type of like automation or AI, and I fell victim to this pretty early on in my career, was I tried to AI or automate like everything. I went in, it's like immediately, yep, we should automate that thing. And then after I spent like a full week or two building out this huge workflow and whatever workflow tool you use, the next day my manager was like, hey, we're doing something else. Kill that. We're going to do this other thing. So I think the first thing to note is like, well, before implementing anything, it's like first we need to figure out whether this is actually like worth AIing or worth implementing. And I think the only way to do that is to do fully human, end to end. What does the process look like? And then after that, you can really start identifying the small things that we can start automating. And I think the things that AI is really good at is like very straightforward tasks that you can explain to like um to I don't know, like a toddler, and the toddler can understand, but the AI is like way more powerful than the toddler, so it can go out and use all the different tools that you give it. So yeah, those are some like quick thoughts I have on that.
What's really interesting, as you touched on it, is I mean, I have a toddler in the analogy, and it's giving it instructions and letting it go is great. And I think the one thing that I've run into as well, especially with this like vibe coding push, is it's almost build then think. It's so easy to build then think because it's fine. You build shiny objects. When you get into workflows, it's so exciting to see the numbers go through the API, the webhooks, the automations. But then it's the classic. Well, do we even need to automate this? But I think the other part you were touching on a bit is oftentimes when you rush to automate, you actually don't know what problem you're really solving. So sometimes you can be automating something that's completely different or even separate or even not worth automating. I think that's what's also hard when the inputs are so easy that it's carrying or even taking the time to take a step back in handwriting. And so much so nowadays, I love fountain pens. I have horrible handwriting, but I got some fountain pens behind me. Is I started like handwriting what I'm trying to do, just so I have to take like 5 minutes, draw it out, map it out, and that's made such a big difference rather than throwing it into Claude or a Lovable or a Replit to say, build me this, integrate this, and do this. So that's interesting to kind of hear how it's like the learning experience. You always go through the build too soon. When you've I guess entering the workforce and kind of figuring this out, how do you think, like you said, kind of educating a toddler, how have you seen the differentiating between like someone who's really good versus someone who's just okay? Where do you think a lot of that skill comes from?
Really good at being AI native. Is that the question?
AI never, even especially more on the marketing side or even the work you're doing, like where do you think the law of the skill sets are? Because I've seen it's like everything else. Like I've heard CEOs, executives say, I don't need an engineer anymore. I can vibe code everything. You talk to an engineer and they're like, that is horrible mistake.
Yeah.
You need this. I've seen the same thing with technical founders say sales. Like I don't need sales. My AI agent can call everyone. Where do you think the real skill set is, especially on the go-to-market side, where there's that learning or that human nature that makes it different than just asking Claude to run a GTM motion straight off the bat, where you're kind of
Yeah,
telling a toddler to just figure it all out?
that's actually a great question. There's a couple things. I think first is the user has to be the one making the decisions. And that doesn't mean that, oh, like I have to make the decisions. I don't take any inputs from anyone else or any AI or anything, but it means as the human in the loop, as the person who's making the decisions, let me go and ask AI and try to get as much context as I can And then I can start making decisions. Okay, let's go focus on this thing. After we're finished with that, let's move on to the next project. That project isn't working anymore. Let's go back and fix what was broken. So there's all these different things that are going on. But I think one thing is this idea that we've like all kind of heard, this buzzworthy thing. We just need to be like super high agency, figure out the problem, go find it, and then have the AI that can go and help you solve the problem. With you at the helm driving all decisions. Um, so I think that's the first thing when it comes to like being, how do you say, like the skills that differentiate.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing, which is honestly more foundational, is just like an innate curiosity for exploring these different things. Like
Mm-hmm.
for me as a kid in college, like I was just fascinated by all this stuff and wanted to get my hands dirty. And then I come into the workforce and there's all these people who have been doing their job for years, 10, 20 years, and they're so comfortable that they have figured everything out. And honestly, they have figured everything out. But now that things are changing, they have figured everything out, so they don't need to keep exploring. They don't need to find the new tool that will make their job 10x faster or whatever. But for me, I'm like diving into all these things, even if there's this new tool that would honestly be a waste of time if I just like went and explored it. Just out of my pure curiosity, I want to go and check it out and see what OpenClaw can do if I
Yeah.
give it like this specific task. And so I think that's one thing is just like this innate curiosity to just find new tools and play around with them.
It's the classic saying. It's if you like love what you do and you have that curiosity, it's how you become really good. Because even for me, doing this podcast, even doing, every week I'm building a new app, just learning these new tools because like you said, there's so much noise out there, especially so we're so early on. Like nowadays, back in the day, back in I started my career, this was similar with CRMs. There was like 1,000 CRMs out there for like small companies. You have to try them all out. Now it's pretty much more consistent. You have the Attios, the HubSpots, the Salesforce. But now with AI tools, because they're coming up every day, no one knows what the best tools or the winner is because it's just such a fast pace. You have to have that innate curiosity to try. And oftentimes, like I said, like the silliest things I've built that had no connection to business somehow sometimes end up helping me with a lot of these business things because it's taking an idea from somewhere, being able to generate images here. Oh, I could use this for outbound. It's this weird connections as you kind of expand your knowledge base. And it is very interesting where it's this. I mean, that's like anything else back earlier in my career. Like this was a social media thing where you had these large marketing agencies and they had these young children or kids at the time with social media who had better outreach, better scalability than traditional paid ads. So it's always interesting, kind of the next wave pushing the boundaries. But there is still obviously some value in that consistency and knowledge. When
Yeah, I think
yeah.
the balance is quite interesting. I'm not sure if you heard the Steve Jobs story of
Mm-hmm.
when he was like first starting out college. He was just like random kid just hopping around random classes and just so happened to stumble into this like random calligraphy class.
Mm-hmm.
And so like did this calligraphy class, really enjoyed it. Years from then, he like built Macintosh, was like the first computer to implement fonts, which really set them apart. And I think like that is probably the best example that I can think of at least where someone just led with their curiosity, figured out like, oh, this thing interests me, so I'm gonna go explore it. And then only down the line did we actually see, oh, there was a connection from that to the new thing that he's doing, which actually became useful. And so
Yeah.
I think in a similar type of way where we're just like exploring our curiosity with AI, I think it leads to some of these interesting discoveries.
The Steve Jobs story is so great. And I use it a lot in my day to day, more in the sense of the one thing people innately have is like random curiosities. So like what makes you, the skills for, let's say, a sales rep, a marketing rep, or anyone else is relatively consistent, but your unique experiences in life shape how you do things. And my Steve Jobs stories, I spent 3 months in Japan working at a bonsai nursery. Now, I haven't started Apple yet or done anything, but if anytime I have success, it's tying back to my time in Japan, anyone who's speaking English, but working on these 300-year-old trees. But it's those unique experiences that give you that outside look that no one else would seem as important. Like the calligraphy, the idea of UX, UI, really focusing on design principles for something that was typically not that sexy. Computers made such a big difference early on. When I guess what's kind of interesting tying on this is obviously you have this innate curiosity around it. How do you figure out what to like? Is it based on interest? Where are you finding out these new tools? Kind of how do you go by? Because more in the sense of, know a lot of people who have interest, but it can be overwhelming. You're on LinkedIn every day. Another company raised $50 million doing the exact same thing you think someone else did. How do you not stay, I guess, stay on top as much as you can of this when there's so many different sources? Are like, do you enjoy are you using Reddit? Are you just friends and family through LinkedIn? Kind of how do you get on in tune with what's out there and kind of what's cool and bleeding edge?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think a lot of the times it's super easy to get bogged down with a lot of the noise, like, oh, scrolling through LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever. It's like, okay, cool, all these things are happening. Honestly, I've done this a lot just in life in general. I have the filter of like, if I hear about it, then it's worth exploring. Because I don't
Mm.
spend hours and hours on Twitter or
Mm-hmm.
wherever. I just know that if I hear about it from a friend who's also in tech or from my boss or a coworker, then it's worth exploring. Because if it's gotten through them and they have gotten the if it's so much motivation that they care enough to share this thing with me,
Mm-hmm.
then that must mean that there's at least something there. And it doesn't mean that, oh, for sure I'll go explore. It just means like it has passed the check of okay, this is past the filter and I can maybe I'll explore it, maybe I won't.
I think that's such an interesting thing because I think it's so easy. If you're very into it, everything is cool and cutting edge. But once it passes, like the more general public, or the classic saying is, it's a bubble when your parents ask you about it. It's like when your parents are asking about crypto or asking about AI, you're like, okay, now it's gone to mainstream when it's someone who's not in the industry
Exactly, yeah.
speaking about it. Um, and it's so kind of interesting to see, especially with these new tooling. Like when I have a CEO or other people in less technical roles asking me about some of these agents, I'm like, okay, now we're getting to more of the mainstream, more of the interest.
And I
With
think an important
those.
caveat there is to admit that I think I can only do this because the people I'm surrounded by
Mm-hmm.
are super in the loop with what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I were to do this in, I don't know, Omaha, Nebraska or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
then I'm sure it would be a lot more difficult than in San Francisco.
Yeah, I think, well, especially being in SF, you're at a level of pace that is unmatched, and I think you talked about that as well before. It's being out there. Everyone is super fast paced, being on the bleeding edge, kind of being able to learn from others through um, just kind of being near other people who are doing the exact same thing as you, who you can bounce ideas off. So you're not on your own island. Um, I guess one kind of interesting thing more around, obviously, like with marketing, go to market, and sales around this AI go to market push. And this is more of your opinion. Oftentimes, you kind of see a mixture of heavy use of AI for whether it be content creation, ad creation, because it gets you the volume, allows you to fill the social media. And the other side, people still want that, this AI slop or this ease of becoming. I think the challenge is it's so easy to just tell Claude, build me 7 more posts, do 300 more outreach. How, when you kind of approach these problems, do you not get sucked into the ease of just telling AI to do everything for you, like we touched on before, and kind of really ensuring that there's that quality there? Because it's so easy just to say, do a little bit more, do a little bit more outreach, and then without that personalization.
Yeah, I think it probably just comes down to like most things, the balance between in this case it would just be like automation versus manual.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is like, oh, the more manual you get, the more personalization you can get. But I think with AI it's kind of like flipped this on its head where it's not a complete trade-off. Or it's not like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, if it becomes more manual then or more um if it becomes more automated then it's all of a sudden less personalized. But I think it does come down to just like the user and their quality bar, meaning the
Mm-hmm.
user and their decisions of being like, if they have a low quality bar, then of course what the output is going to be isn't great. Like if you put a 5-year old who has no idea about like what good art looks like, then of course it's going to output like the most terrible things in the world. But if you put like a Da Vinci with
Mm-hmm.
Gemini, then their things might cook up and they might make some insanely cool stuff.
I think that's so interesting. I think that ties into a little bit of like having that expertise is where it plays the value of helping have a higher bar because you know what's good. And I think with a lot of these tools, it's so easy to get like a baseline of okay, but because now everyone has an okay baseline, the great is knowing what makes good to great. What is that difference? And I think what you touched on right there, which is probably the most interesting thing, is that more workflow or automation does mean less personalized. I think that's oftentimes overlooked, or at least assumed that, well, if we're going to automate this, now it's just going to be more generic, when you can really make it hyper personalized based on signals, based on data coming in, based on first party data if you're building it off your CRM. So I think that's kind of interesting perspective. That's not it's not an extreme one or the other. It's a little bit of a gradient based on what is what you view as your bar, and especially I think also the other side of things, and I've told this to many founders as well, just because you're doing things manually doesn't necessarily mean it's ineffective. Because at the end of the day, whether it's sales or fundraising, whatever gets results is the answer. If you have to go to a great example is I knew one executive, he would have coffee chats or like at a conferences. That's all he would do all day. And maybe had 10 meetings, but his conversion rate was 100%. Everyone he talked to, we
Yeah.
convert a deal. Where the other rep did 100,000 emails, zero conversion. So it's okay. It's so easy, as you touch on, to focus on these big numbers, big volume, but if it's not getting you conversions or focusing on your key KPI, whatever gets you there is the goal. Automation for the sake of automation is useless. It's just more of an ego thing at that point. So that's kind of interesting perspective, how you've been able to notice it early on where results are really what matters. Is there, when you're kind of looking at the future, and this is like the futuristic question everyone always loves to ask, is where do you think, obviously now we're focusing, there's a lot of this tooling that's helping. Maybe what you're working or messing around with now, where do you think the next, I mean, this is maybe more of a broad question, big benefit, or where do you think AI is really going to stop helping the go-to-market motion, where maybe it's not used as much now? Or the inverse of the question as well is, where do you think AI is being not used too much, but over relied on as a crutch, especially in the go-to-market motion, where you feel people are now starting to less dependent on it, or maybe change up how they use their workflows there?
Yeah, I think first, I think let's start with where AI
Mhm.
will for sure be helpful. Like for sure, AI will be helpful in automating like the menial tasks.
Mhm.
For sure, it'll be helpful with all the basic things that most people are still using
Mhm.
for today. A couple of things where I think could be interesting for sure, that we haven't seen too
Mhm.
well yet is videos. I think videos will be quite interesting, especially as it starts going
Mhm.
into social media. Um, videos will be interesting, and then on the flip side, part of where I think AI has like to commoditize in a sense.
Mhm.
Um, One example is these super AI emails where it's like they've like they dove into your entire life backstory and like know exactly this very specific detail of this like very specific thing. And it's like sure, maybe a human did it, but it's like very reads like AI, looks
Mhm.
like AI, probably is AI. That's one thing where I think is probably pushed too much. And then, of course, in social media already, I think a lot of these like LinkedIn posts or X posts is like very, very heavily AI, and it's very, at least in the brief like look at it, it looks very AI, and so that's one example where I think it's probably gone too over the board with it. But um, I think higher level, there's been this big shift,
Mhm.
um, I think more societally
Mhm.
for in person activities, in person events, in person gifts, stuff like that. And
Mhm.
so even with conferences, I think they've been blowing up more than usual, or more than they have in the past. In person gifting, I think just makes you
Mhm.
stand out so much more. Like these, how would you say, these big marketing like launches or big marketing blasts that are not via your email or not
Mhm.
via your phone or computer, but they're like in your face, physical object, physical thing that gets you out there, I think stands out way, way more, especially now.
It's so funny. So those are the two things I was saying: the mass emails being less, like, very commoditized, very consistent, and the too hyper personalization. Where so much so, a lot of my outbound now, for whether it be anything conversations, it's been just even less like, hey, like what you're doing, let's hop on it. Like so generic that people are like, this is a real person speaking. Not like, hey, in 2022 you did this. This is how you. These are the pain points, and it's like, okay,
Exactly.
this
Yeah.
is way too much to read. And what's so funny you talk about the in-person thing. I've seen the rise of conferences, and even through my own career, when I first started, everyone's good to play golf. Golf's where everything's happening. But then, like, Zoom and like remote meetings became more popular. So I never got invited anywhere. And I'm like, I'm a genius, never have to play golf. My dad was lied to me. Golf's not that important for business. Now all of a sudden, I'm getting invited to so many conferences, more pickleball, still some golf, but more pickleball these days, or padel if you go more European. So it's this
Yep.
interesting thing where like I've even building on some side projects around this gifting is this hyper, like you said, impactful, in your face, like real experiences, because those can't be replaced. And I think it's like anything else is when there's before conferences were rough because I knew people going to conference every week. That's just too much. Now it's been rare because of COVID. People are like, I want to meet this people in person. It's less intensive. It's less fast paced, but now hyper specialized, hyper focused. And even seeing, especially in SF, the ICP dinners where everyone's hosting a dinner for like-minded individuals. So we're seeing this move back to not manual, move back to like, yeah, as you said, the in-person experience is an interesting shift because that's where it gets interesting, especially with how easy it is. Some companies saying 100,000 emails. I know somebody's saying 100,000 emails a month and they have 50 customers, which your conversion rate is atrocious. Something isn't
Yeah,
working here.
exactly.
Something needs to change. So that's super interesting perspective. Where So I think that's kind of interesting. I think video is also interesting. I've dabbled with video and automating video. Video is still kind of expensive to generate if you're not smart with it,
Exactly. Yeah.
which is always a fun little problem. But as you kind of now kind of grow and scale and focus on this, how do you think? I guess this is an interesting question, especially on your earlier on in your career. Is when it comes to the classic thing is, I've worked for a lot of CEOs where it's like, we're going to use agents, we're going to use AI to not have to hire headcount, or we can extend headcount. In your view, where do you think a person is required in the loop these days, especially if you're a small team looking to hire? Where have you seen, okay, like this is maybe where you want to consider a person to really help accelerate the AI adoption or AI usage, because having one person do
Yeah.
too many hats can become a challenge.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting, especially in the sales world, because there's
Mm-hmm.
this a lot of hype over like the AI BDR, the AI SDR, and like Artisan, and there's a couple other like people who are building in the space. I haven't really seen that take off,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm actually like kind of seeing the opposite, where we've all kind of realized, okay, AI is great, but maybe it's not the best at this BDR SDR type of role. So instead of that, let's instead of doing like AI BDRs, let's do AI native or AI enabled BDRs, and so build these tools to make them like supercharge their productivity, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the reason I say that is because I think there's something to this where there's certain roles that are extremely hard to automate out or extremely hard to completely make AI because of the nature of the role. And I think BDR is exactly that type of role. Um, other types are I think every like I see every individual contributor type of role that's not like sales focus or
Mm-hmm.
customer facing focus um, is basically a manager at this point, and a manager to manage a ton of
Mm-hmm.
agents. And so with that, you basically are just hiring managers who can manage a ton of agents nowadays. And so the places where hiring a person becomes super helpful is when it's when the individual contributor can no longer create more agents or can no longer manage enough agents, and so that's when you bring another person who can take the helm there.
That's actually a great response. I've asked this question to a lot of people, and so it's like everyone has the same idea about how you communicate it. That's fantastic. Because I think it's always interesting where, and you even touched this earlier on, is that once you want someone who knows the domain, who's actually auditing it. I think that's such a slippery slope. I've working with very small teams where you start the agents writing outreach content or writing a post, you read it, and then you get another agent to review it, and then it's starting to post without even looking anymore. And that's when you start getting a little bit sloppy because, as you know, no matter how good you prompt, no matter how good your MD files are, how good your context window is, you need to have someone managing the employee. And just like hiring a junior employee, like they can start off great and then they get off the rails. And unless you're monitoring and helping
Yeah.
and encouraging it, you kind of have that problem. And I've seen that more and more where it's like the AI empowered part. And I was also surprised. I was early on in the days had a lot of these demos and kind of testing out these AI, BDR, and SDRs. And I mean, I'm not a very outbound organization technically comparatively to some of these other SaaS industries, but yeah, I'm surprised they haven't taken off as much as you would expect for how many, they're advertising, how they're positioning it. And I think the BDR role is easy to say to automate, but at the end of the day, especially when it comes to more technical products or demos, you typically want to have someone to talk you through it, to have a human you can reach out to. Because I got an email. This is relevant. I got an email, and this made me angry. I don't know why it made me so angry. I got an email saying, "Congratulations, based on your usage, you have a customer success individual now on your account. Meet like Steve, your AI agent." And I got so angry. And I said, "Why are you sending me an email that I got an agent? You've always had electronic support. I was expecting a human," because I go to it and ask it a question that's not typical. And it says, "Oh, send us an email. We'll get back to you in a week." And I said, "This is just
Exactly.
making
Yeah.
me angry. Why are you advertising?" Like, I understand the use case there, but it's also this understanding. I think I've worked for a lot of people building in tech. In tech, people found AI very cool. Like, wow, you have your custom agent, it has context. But as an end customer, I only care if I get results. I don't care if it's AI, if it's a human. I just want my questions answered. And I think that's sometimes hard when you're building very technical products. The fact that your customers might not really care. They just want a good experience. And we're seeing that more and more on the movie industry side, where like over the past few months, the biggest movies were made by like 20-year-old and 26-year-old with a very low budget because people just care about the product. They don't really care if it's a big studio or anything else. So I think it's an interesting perspective there. And yeah, I kind of as we wrap up here, and it's been pretty insightful conversation. How I like to end off is one. Where do you think is, you know, you touched on this a little bit. Like, where do you think, maybe not work related, but where do you think a new fun use case could be of AI over the next, whether it be in your personal life or other life, where you think has been automated yet, where you think would be useful? And then secondly, to end off here is, if someone wants to get more, classic question, into the, go to market engineering, go to market stuff, how do you start? Because you said you came from philosophy and then came into this philosophy or psychology. You said philosophy, right?
Philosophy. Yeah.
Although, fun fact, a lot of people I know in philosophy have very fun, interesting jobs because it gets you to think, especially in this AI world, managing people, you need to have
Exactly.
that mindset. But if people want to kind of get into this space, how do you get into it if you come from maybe a not technical sales background or anything else? I think those are the two questions. Any part in your life you think AI might have an interesting use case that we touched on a little bit? And then the bigger question is, how do you get into this space when there's so much information? You might not be in the rooms with everyone else. You might be in the middle of Arkansas, or our case, middle of Alberta, on the ranch. How do you learn about this and try to get involved?
Mm. Let's see. To the first one, a different use case. Um, I'm honestly not too sure of a great use case. Um, that hasn't already
Mm-hmm.
been working on or hasn't already been done. In terms of like for someone starting off in their
Mm-hmm.
career or like wanting to get into the whole GTM space, I would say it comes back to the first thing I think we talked about, or one of the first things is just having like this natural curiosity, and you'd be surprised by how much you can teach yourself. Almost everything I've learned up to now has all been taught um through Claude. Like I'll or through Claude or ChatGPT or wherever is like, hey, I'm working on this new project. Guide me through each step of this. And of course, the first time I do it, I'm so terrible, so bad, and I have no idea what I'm doing. But as I like continue to do it, continue to build those skills, then eventually I gain this new intuition where I can tell when AI is going off the rails and when I have to jump in and start doing it. So I would say probably the best thing is just like staying curious about these tools and continuing to use them and teaching yourself as they keep improving.
I think the thing to touch on, as you just did, is that this whole world is new. So no one actually knows all the answers yet. And I think that's the thing, is even if you're earlier in your career, because everyone has to keep learning, you can get caught up or at least get close to the speed relatively quickly if you have that curiosity. And then, yeah, as we wrap up here, do you have any? I mean, we can add this in or remove this. Do you have any socials? If we want to connect to you on LinkedIn, what's your LinkedIn? Because yeah, you've been a great
Yeah, awesome,
podcast.
awesome. No, I think the only thing is LinkedIn is the biggest one. Just Dean Wata, my first and last name. But yeah, would love to connect.